Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second session of our renewed series of NCTR dialogues. My name is Sandra Bender. I am the Community Engagement and Education Program Coordinator with the NCTR. So I'm here today to welcome us to a dialogue on the subject of sacred women. And we have three incredible women here with us today. I'm really pleased to introduce to you all Kimberley Levasseur Puhach, Dr. Karine Duhamel, and Elder Amanda Wallin. So welcome to all three of you. Just as housekeeping before we get going, I'll just share we are having some trouble with our Facebook live stream, but someone is working on it. Meanwhile, if people have questions or comments as we go, feel free to post them in the comments. And when there's a good time, I'll bring them up and ask our guests to address them. So let's kick it off. And I'll ask each one of you if you could tell us a bit about yourselves in broad strokes. Who are you? What do you do in this life, in this world? And say as much or as little as you would like. Dr. Duhamel, would you like to start?
Sure, I can. Good morning, bonjour, hello, everybody, or afternoon, I guess, at this point. Happy Friday, I guess. My name is Karine Duhamel. I am a historian by training, and I'm coming to you today actually from Treaty 3 territory in Ontario. I am a status member of Red Rock Indian Band, which is just outside of Thunder Bay, Ontario, which is where my mother's side of the family is from. And my relatives are the Delarons and the Wawias from out in that area. In my daily life, I do a lot of different things, but I am currently Director of Indigenous Strategy for the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. And I'm also a speaker for the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba, proudly working with them for a number of years. And involved in a few other things here and there as my passion takes me. I also am former director of research for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, where I had the honor to walk alongside family members and survivors of violence, as well as of residential and day schools, in trying to better understand and communicate the root causes of ongoing violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and transgender people. So, Chimigwach, it's nice to be here, and thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you for accepting it. Kimberley, would you like to speak next?
Anin bojo, bejik penesi kwen indigenikas, migazi du dem, ga wekwe dangang, nendunji, shugo Winnipeg nendunji. So good to be with all of you. Good afternoon. I'm also known as Kimberley Levasseur Puhach. I just introduced myself traditionally. I've been taught that when we start off that way, we're responsible and committed to saying things in a good way. So I know that we're going to be chatting a lot about good things today, and I'm looking forward to being with all of you. I am a wife, a mother. I am the daughter of an Indian residential school survivor. And in my day work, I'll say, I'm the Vice President of People, Culture, and Growth at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. I also volunteer on a few boards and advisory councils, one of which is End Homelessness Winnipeg. I also sit with the Circle of Indigenous Relations for United Way, and I'm the past chair of the Mayor's Indigenous Advisory Circle. And I also sit on the Manitoba Heart and Stroke Advisory Board, the Provincial Advisory Board, and there's a National Indigenous Advisory Circle that I also sit in committee with. So it's just nice to be with all of you today, miigwech.
Miigwech to you, Kimberley. Elder Amanda.
Tansei. Hello, bonjour. My name's Amanda. I'm currently the elder for the Bishop of Rupert's Land. My Indigenous name is Black Cloud Woman. I come from Treaty 6. And I'm a knowledge keeper. I pick my own medicines. I do the teachings. And I'm very fulfilled in my work. There's always somebody needing that help. And every time I go and I feel like I'm helping somebody, it always comes back to gifts of my own, something that I've learned, something that I've taken away from it. So it's very fulfilling. It's very fulfilling. I'm excited because spring is around the corner, I hope, and the medicines will be ready to be picked. And lots of people interested in finding their way back to their indigenous ways, and not knowing or not understanding. And if I'm able to bring a little bit of understanding to that, I think that's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. So we chose the topic of sacred women because the International Women's Day falls in March. So just speaking very broadly about female Indigenous identity, I was wondering if you could each speak a little bit about which words you use to describe your identity. Go ahead, whoever would like to start.
I think for myself, it's kind of in my name, Black Cloud Woman. When I got my Indigenous name many, many, many years ago, I was not happy. Why would you name me Black Cloud Woman? I'm thinking of Charlie Brown and the cloud over his head and everything. This is not right. And the elders chuckled and said, "You understand it's a sky name? Do you understand what a black cloud does? It nourishes and washes Mother Earth. It nourishes and brings life." When I was young and I heard that, it felt like that was a very important name. And for me, that's what it's been, is trying to nourish people, trying to help them understand, what it's like to walk in our shoes, what it's like, and how we've walked in, our life from a little girl up. It's it hasn't been an easy journey for a very high percentage of our Indigenous women, men, children. And if I can bring a little bit of understanding, if I can bring a little bit of knowledge and even some acceptance in there, I think that I'm doing a good thing. And that's what makes me happy, is helping others. I don't claim to have the answers to everything for sure, but there's amazing elders out there. There's amazing Indigenous people out there that are reaching out to you. They're there. If you want to learn and you want to know, there's a way. So for me, it's teaching.
Kimberley, I remember when you started at the museum and you gave us all the gift of the word ikwe, which you will have displayed in your pronouns. Can you teach us what that word means and how it's not just the same as she, her, or woman?
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to be able to honor that identity in a very clear way when I first came to the museum, knowing that we were also, as you know, Sandra, honoring the use of pronouns. And so for me, ikwe, which really is celebrating my identity as a woman, needed to lead that in that little descriptor of pronoun use. And it was also a reminder that in my language, in Indigenous languages, we don't really gender words. So although there is a term for a man and a woman, obviously ikwe is women, there's no pronoun use throughout the language. So often my mom, as an example, she'll be telling me something and she'll say he when she really means she. They're just used interchangeably. So it was important for me to add that to my identity. And I would also say, just like Elder Amanda just shared, our Indigenous names that we were given give us identity. So I introduced myself traditionally, and I didn't share what that traditional name was, knowing that we'd probably talk more about who we are. And so similarly, my spirit name, my traditional name is Lone Thunderbird Woman. And I also introduced my clan, which is Eagle Clan, and I shared a place marked for everyone that I'm from the Sandy Bay Anishinaabe Nation, which is on the west shore of Lake Manitoba. And that forms part of a holistic sense of identity, and our identity as it relates to the land, most importantly. So when we think about this idea of reconciliation and what does that really mean for people? So for many of us, it could be quite literally land back when we hear that term. And the importance of land as it relates to our identity as Indigenous peoples is it's so direct. So just by introducing myself, I'm sharing the importance of land. The land connects us to our sacred laws, to our natural world, water, sky. It gives us sustenance. It allows us to live because of the waters. There's so much that is who we are as people that is related to the land. So that also, I think about that a lot, especially contemporarily, and in ways when we still as Indigenous people are on a journey to reclaim culture and to really begin to understand who we are in those deepest places, that it's challenging living in a world where, and I'd be interested to hear what Karine and Elder Amanda think about that careful navigation of what is two worlds. And maybe one day those two worlds will get more singular, and we won't say two worlds or two wide seeing. We're just going to see, and we're just going to live.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I mean, I think my experience, it used to be something that I really wasn't comfortable talking about, because I used to say that, people would say, oh, like, what's your traditional name? And I would say, well, I don't have one. And an elder corrected me, and she said, no, you just don't know what it is. You do have one. Right. And so for me, I spent most of my life in a very non-Indigenous world, and really was as a product of the experiences that my grandmother and my great-grandmother had as Indigenous women in and around Thunder Bay in their communities. And so for me, my family wasn't very connected to that. And I remember feeling like very ashamed of not being able to introduce myself in my language, of not being able to share my traditional name or my real name, because I just don't know what it is, right? So, I mean, I think this for me has been a bit of a process where I'm still very much engaged in learning. My sister, Natalie, has done a ton of work and of research, and actually is going to be heading to our community this summer, and I'm hoping to join because it would be the first time that we've ever actually been there and been able to sit with some of the elders there and talk with them. So, I was really fortunate when I joined the National Inquiry to be surrounded by this amazing circle of grandmothers and elders and knowledge keepers who really encouraged me to keep searching, and to keep looking for some of those answers and some of that knowledge. So, I think, what I've heard about my family through this research is that there are folks that are kind of related to us that are Turtle Clan, and there are folks that are related to us that are Wolf Clan. And I'm just starting to sort of wrap my head around what that means that I am and what that means that I do. But I think, I see myself also as a person that does a lot of teaching to a lot of different folks, who's really very able to strategize about things that will like lift us up and just help I think our relatives help us to take our places kind of in this world, right? So to Kimberly's concepts around the idea of walking in two worlds, I've spent much of my life with a foot firmly set in one of them, and just kind of dipping my toes in and continuing the learning journey of getting in touch with, where I come from and who I am and who my family is. Because, in our case, colonization really worked in the sense that it did make lots of people in my family very ashamed to be Indigenous people. And I think of my granny and my great granny, who had some experiences that just made them feel like it was better if they didn't say who they were. And because of that, I feel like it's kind of my job my job, and also the job of my sister and other people in my family, to try to reconnect, because I take, the idea of being a good ancestor one day really seriously. And I guess for me, I'm very honest and very direct to say I'm still figuring out what that looks like for me and in my family.
You mentioned the reality of walking in at least two worlds. I think that must be true for a lot of Indigenous women. Karine, with your strong background in the academic world, as well as getting in touch with, all of the parts of Indigenous identity in that non-colonial world. And Kimberley, you're really someone who has forged your way in the corporate world. All those connections that you mentioned, you're truly someone who's in many, many worlds. And then Amanda, I know you're deeply involved in the Anglican Church as well as being a traditional knowledge keeper. So that's also two different worlds. Has there been conflict between your worlds?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's difficult. I tell people, it feels like I got one foot in a church and the other in a teepee. It's not easy. It's not easy. You have to find that fine line, and you have to be open. You have to be forgiving, and forgiveness is not an easy thing, especially with the churches, And I totally understand that. I myself was raised by Catholic nuns for 4 years, and forgiveness is a personal journey. Some of us, can get there a little bit better, but luckily being raised by elders, and also being raised in the Anglican Church, I've been able to bring respect to both worlds, to help the non-Indigenous people see how I grew up, see how I lived, totally different from a colonial way of being raised. And I could be angry, but as an elder, I'm not going to help anybody if I don't fix my anger. So the biggest thing is forgiveness. And some people say, well, can't you just forgive and get on with it? No, it doesn't work that way. Forgiveness, again, is a personal journey, and it's not easy. I still hear some horrific stories where I have to be strong. I have to help this person as I would my dearest loved one, because that's what an elder does. They care about that person, and understanding, I would say 100% of our Indigenous people walk in two worlds. It's not easy, but it is doable. And how do I do it? The Creator. The Creator keeps me humble. That's the first thing you learn when you're in a sweat. You go down on your knees and you crawl in. Your humility. Always remember your humility. Even though I've managed to get rid of my hurt and anger from the Catholic nuns, I know there's people out there still really, really hurting, and I have to be mindful of that, and vice versa. I know a lot of non-Indigenous folks who don't understand and wish they did, and just it's like you had said, Kimberly, bringing those two worlds together, hopefully one day, and but it is not as trying as it was in my younger days, but I still walk in two worlds. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What about for you two, Kim and Karine? How has that negotiation between your two worlds worked for you?
Karen, do you want to
Sure.
share?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kim. Yeah, I mean, I think, I echo what we've already heard, which is to say it's been a struggle at times. I come from a professional training and background that's very much not, or that is often very misaligned with even just Indigenous ontologies and epistemologies and how people know what they know. And I think, at least in the academic world, you know what you know because somebody wrote it at some point, and that's how you know, right? And I think that, being able to kind of reconnect with a lot of people, reconnect with some elements of where I come from and who I am, but also just recognizing how much of a bigger world out there of knowledge there is that's not written down, that exists, that's so important in kind of centering us, has been really helpful. So for me, I mean, I feel very much walking in two worlds, especially when I'm doing work, with researchers from the perspective of a federal funding agency. That can be really challenging sometimes. But I also really see a lot of the opportunity in that is to really be a teacher and help people understand that better. So the bridge for me, and I think what probably helps me like sort of keep my spirit right and my soul right, is that teaching part where I'm here in this space that can sometimes be really difficult and challenging. But I'm here to do something, and I'm here, to help, and I'm here to help translate things, and I'm here also to help represent some ideas that maybe are not as common in these spaces. So for me, that's really the bridge, and that's also the way that I think I can see it. What could be seen as a negative is just a really welcome and positive challenge and an opportunity to, change things. Maybe not in this time or in the time that I'm in, but for the future and for the ones that will come after us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, Karen, you and I share similar stories. I would agree that my my approach in just navigating has been to be a bridge builder, to try and be able to see those two worlds in a way that can be good, so that it's not trading one for the other, but rather seeing it as an opportunity to connect, whether it's people, whether it's organizations, whether it's thoughts and ideas. Trying to also do that without a lot of judgment, although that's very hard. And then also, I'd say, in looking back, I mean, I'm fair skinned, so I was able to pass, and that gave me that face of white privilege that many of my relatives didn't and don't still have. And so that was challenging, both when I would go to Sandy Bay and be at what felt like such a home place for me, in comparison to being away, either in what my hometown was. I was born in Winnipeg, but raised in Morris, very Christian Bible Belt, southern Manitoba. And it was easier for us to hide when we needed to, whereas my relatives did not have that ability. And so now, you fast forward, and although we would see it as progress, I want to be proud, and I am proud, and I'm very loud about it. And I think that here we are today in a place where non-Indigenous people want to claim identity. And who would have ever imagined that problem to be solved? So, it's so complicated, but I think, much like Elder Amanda said, I try and center myself within those 7 sacred teachings. And although that's not how they would have ever been described to me, because my mom too was raised in a Catholic religious indoctrination, is also in this in-between world, yet those teachings, that blood memory, is very, very much alive. Those ancestors are with us and remind us. So I think I was raised from a traditional values perspective, but not even knowing that's what that was. And humility was the punctuation of it all. I was never allowed to brag. Like, that's how she would say, you do not brag about yourself. You do not talk about yourself. You're no better than anyone else. We always help other people. Even just things like admiring yourself in the mirror was just, she would not be happy that you would just think that you're something, because you're nothing, and not in a demeaning way. It was just a reminder. So I'm really thankful for that, actually, now. Then it was hard to understand what was happening, other than my self-worth was a little depleted. But all that to say is that I think that when you're navigating life and the complexities around who we are in our identity, you find ways to do it, and you do it in a good way.
I just want to add just a little thing to what Kim said, because it made me laugh. It made me remember a very recent situation that I had where I thought about this exact thing. So I was in the middle of an interview for a position that I really wanted, and I was having trouble because I've done, as I've been on this kind of learning journey, I've really taken this idea of humility like as a really important touchstone for myself and for the work that we do. And so when I was asked, like, in this interview, people said, well, why don't you tell us about like all these great things about yourself? And I feel like I was like, well, I try not to do that anymore, like in any, like, not that I was a big bragger before, but I'm very conscious of, like, how I don't want to do that. So it was really hard for me. And I think I maybe didn't do a very good job in the interview, partially because I was really thinking about, really highlighting, like, the way in which I think it's important to put these values front and center, even in the context of something like a job interview or meeting new people. So anyways, it just kind of made me chuckle when you said that, Kim, because I thought, oh yeah, I felt that very deeply, like in the last month. It was a very conscious thing. So.
And that is a real clash between those concepts of walking in a good way and our, very postmodern, capitalist, individualist society where it's always sort of look out for number one. And so you have to be promoting yourself at all times. Yeah, I can see that being hard to reconcile. We've just had a question come in that I've put on the screen here. Samantha has asked, how do you address the guilt one can feel or come up when identifying as Indigenous, especially when you do not look like the traditional Indigenous image in the public eye has? Thanks for that question, Samantha.
Thank you for the question, Samantha. That's a really important question. I remember when I was little, I had like corn yellow blonde hair. Like I was like people would joke and say that I had been adopted because I didn't look like any of my other family members really much. And I had yellow, like super pale yellow hair. And I remember my grandma, who was First Nations and who used to tell people she was actually from Spain because she didn't want to tell them where she was actually from. And she would always pet my yellow hair and say, oh, you're so lucky to have this, these features, like, good for you. It was like a thing. But, I think that I've sort of grown into it. For a long time, I didn't really talk about who I was as an Indigenous person, and then I got, more comfortable with it because I really, honestly, I have to say, like, working with the the survivors of violence and the grandmothers at the inquiry, they sort of loved that part of my spirit back to life. And I'm so, so grateful to them for doing that, because I used to feel like quite guilty about sort of saying like, oh, well, this is who I am and this is where my family is from and these are who my relatives are. And I think I've become less so because, like Kim, Kim acknowledged that, she could pass for a non-Indigenous person. And I did that too. But I think I've become just more comfortable with acknowledging like that privilege that I have to be a very white passing person, but yet still being very proud of the fact that I am an Indigenous person and I do have lots and lots of ancestors who had to survive a lot of things for me to be here. And I'm really grateful to them for that. And also acknowledging that like I do have family members that don't pass in the same way that I pass, right? And that my experience because of that is very different than theirs, but it doesn't prevent me from still wanting to talk about and sort of identifying who I am and who my people are, because I think that's really important. And it's one thing that we have to show also youth is to be really proud of that, right? Because we should be really proud of that. They should be really proud of that. There's so much strength and so much hardship that people endured before us to still be here today. And I think when we don't claim that space and we don't say who we are, we don't, I'm not sure if I have the right word for it, but we don't really embrace like that gift that they've given us, right, to survive so that we can be here.
Mm-hmm. That's so well said. I think the other thing that I would add is just indigeneity looks different everywhere. I mean, to your point, Karine, about being light-haired blonde, the thing that I think I get triggered by it a bit when people have in my past also used those microaggressions, and that's one of them. You don't look like your Native Indian then, or First Nations or Aboriginal, whatever the term was. And I sort of take offense to that. What do we look like? Like, what are we supposed to look like? So that maybe that guilt sort of in the beginning, because I will acknowledge for whoever asked that question as a younger person, I can completely relate with having guilt around not fitting in with my family. My nickname in Sandy Bay, there were two. Munyakwe, which was basically a white woman or a fair skinned woman, Munyakwe, or Abita, which is half, like half. So those were terms of endearment then, but in a teasing way that were hurtful. So I can appreciate that guilt of not being recognized or not feeling total confidence in your own skin. And then the questions around who you really are begin to, they stick in you for a long, long time. Now I don't feel that. I know who I am. I'm learning about our culture, my own identity, my family. I try and do what I can within community to share my gifts, and mine are different than everyone else's. We need them all in order then to know that there's nothing to feel guilty of. I'm just as much Indigenous as anyone else, regardless of how light my face is and what I do and how I do it.
That's beautiful. Amanda, did you want to speak to this?
Oh, just, both my parents are very dark. Growing up with white skin, it wasn't something that you were proud of to be Indigenous. Being raised by my grandmother, we did things traditionally in the home. But when we stepped outside that door, it was different. You weren't the same person, eating muskrat and moose meat in the corner as outside. It's different. You don't talk about that. You don't say. So there was a feeling of a little bit of ashamed, I guess, but knowing this is who my family was. When my parents became into their own identity, my father became a traditional dancer, my mother a medicine woman, and seeing all these things grow bigger and bigger from the town. I grew up in Lynn Lake, and then Thompson. You get to see all our people celebrating. It was like, it felt really, really good until I came south to Winnipeg. That's when things really changed. Um, and it was difficult. It was really difficult. I didn't, I still had pride, but I felt like I had to really watch some of the things I said. Uh, I worked in a profession where I worked in emergency at the Misericordia way back in the day, and it was very difficult to, I guess, talk to people and let them know we're a great bunch of folks here. This is what my granny taught me. This is how it's done. And a lot of looked down upon even when I worked at the hospital. So I didn't really speak out. I just kind of stayed and blended with who I could. You know, now that I've come full circle and many years have passed, I am very proud of who I am. And I realize I'm not the only person that had that issue. Um, I was dealing with one girl who didn't want to admit she was Indigenous, dyed her hair, light makeup, everything. And I understood where she was coming from. She was still searching. She still wanted that. Her spirit, like you had said, Karine, what are you going to leave as an ancestor? You know, it's now the time we need to think about what are we going to leave for our children after we're gone? What are they going to see that we've done to make that change, you know? So is there any guilt today? No, not today, but there was a lot growing up. And I think going through all that, along with the other two, we're able to help other people not feel so guilty or wrong for feeling that way. Because I think it's just a lot of it not knowing which way to turn, not knowing which way to go. You know, I was raised white, but I'm with white folks. My adopted, you know, were white, and it's just all kind of mixed up. And you have to have gone through some of that yourself to be able to empathize with that person, you know, to help them find their own way, their own journey. This is what worked for me, I say. It may not work for you, but you give it a try, you know. And that's how we approach everything. And when you were saying, Kimberly, your mom said, "Don't look in the mirror." Oh, my granny was big on don't look in the mirror, don't look in the mirror. But I was raised from a very early age. Remember, my girl, I'm a two-legged, you're two-legged. We're on Mother Earth to protect the four-legged. I bleed red, you bleed red. We need to get along. We treat each other as kin. That's stuck in my head. So I've always had that mentality of, you're no better, but I'm no better. We're equal. And that's always been my driving force, is equality. And it's not always easy, as Kimberly and Karine know. But I think if you have that driving force along with your humility, you're going to be okay.
Thanks for all those answers. You've all made reference, not always super directly, but you've all referred a little bit to some of the barriers that Indigenous women face. Would you like to speak about some of those realities of what it means to be an Indigenous woman in the world today?
Yeah, that's a very big question. And I think that the way I see that is it's just being in the world today. That's how I would maybe reframe that. And then what is guiding me to be in that world today is a set of values. Those 7 teachings are what help me live a good life. And when I think about what does that mean day to day? It means that I want to do good work, and I want to be able to go home at the end of my workday and for the most part know that I've done something good, or that my work generally is good work. So here at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, we're doing a lot of work in trying to build back relationships with communities mine included, but there are many others that have been fractured, and trying to, through those relationships, move in a new path forward for what the Canadian Museum for Human Rights can be versus maybe what we were perceived as being. And that's hard work, and I think it's good work, and I'm doing it from that heart space. When I leave, and I have two children, 24 and 22, Sydney and Logan. Sydney's the oldest and Logan's the baby, I'll say. Knowing that I tried with my husband, who's non-Indigenous, to raise them with values that are centered around those 7 teachings that my kids identify as First Nations, and that they are ceremonial kids, and that they are doing things to support our community and live in good ways. So I think that when I think about, well, what does it mean to be a woman and an Indigenous woman today? There's a lot of responsibility that we carry, and I feel less every day that I carry that alone. There are times where through career, I think we felt so isolated in whatever it was that we were doing. I feel less and less of that every day. And when I think in the spirit of why this discussion, why we're sitting around this beautiful fire, is about women raising up other women, and the role that we have in community and in our families and in our work. And that's exactly what I feel is playing out.
Yeah, that's lovely. Karine or Amanda?
I can speak really briefly to it, but I'd like to hear from Elder Amanda probably more than I can offer here. But I really support what Kimberly was saying. I too feel like more and more as I kind of go out in the world and do different things, I just feel like there is, even though we live in such a kind of a polarized and fractured world, there is like this growing, I don't know, more of a community, more of a force, more of a lot of people starting to be proud of who they are, of reconnecting to their communities, to their families, to their teachings. And I think that's really exciting. I did an event a few years ago, and I was talking about the national inquiry and the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit and transgender people. And there was a young person, a young woman sitting in one of the first 2 rows. And at the end of my presentation, I noticed that she was like really upset, and I felt bad. So I went to go talk to her to see, if there was anything I could do or if she needed anything. And one of the things she said to me, it'll stick with me forever. She said, "I'm not crying because I'm upset." She said, "But I'm crying because as you were sharing some of the stories from survivors, and also some of the traditional stories that they shared with you, I realized that I don't know my own stories. I don't know the stories from my community." And, it's just made me excited to go and try to find what those are. So I think for me, being a person in the world is difficult enough, but like Kimberly said, being an Indigenous woman just for me increasingly feels like there's more and more people doing that, with really good intentions. And that's really an exciting thing, and a great place to be. And I think that's really, what we heard from survivors of violence, what we heard from family members, is that culture is safety. And I think for me, watching that happen, watching, people really seize onto that and pursue it with passion and with their whole heart. That's a really exciting thing to be an Indigenous woman in the world today, to see that happening around me.
Amanda, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's the teaching. It's understanding. There is a very big responsibility put on all Indigenous women, I would say, to come together and work together as family. And that's what we do. It doesn't matter what Indigenous you go to, you're going to be treated like family. and it's, for me, it feels, it's a good thing where it's sad, but I see a lot of our people, especially younger generation, lost. They don't know which way to turn. They don't know how to pray. They're not in touch with their spirituality. So for me, it brings me great joy to be able to talk about the Creator and to be able to help them to understand, our seven sacred teachings, what they mean. It brings great joy that I'm able to help. Like I said, everybody that I see or everybody that requests me, I always come back with, all right, Creator, what did I learn today? And I learned something, and it feels so good to love your brother, your kin, your brothers and sisters, and be able to help them. And it always comes back full circle to you. I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed in my life right now. So for me, it's the joy of helping people who are lost, or maybe not lost. They just have so many questions. They don't understand, so much about their Indigenous ways, or which is the right way. Is there a wrong way? There's no wrong way to pray. There's no wrong way to pray. You talk to the Creator. That's the first thing I tell people when I do teachings. I talk and I say, number one, you pray. Number two, cry when you pray. If you want it bad enough, you'll cry. Number three, don't buy your success. You don't know what you're buying. You don't know who you're buying it from. You can hurt your home. Number four, and we really hit it on the head, don't boast and brag. When you get to a certain, you don't boast and brag about who you are. You let that person know you're just a two-legged like them. You're nobody special. Hopefully I can help you. If not, maybe I can direct you in the right path where somebody can help you. Like Kimberly had said, we all have gifts. We all have gifts. And walking that journey is a good feeling now that there are. Back in my day, there wasn't this much support. But I mean, look at these beautiful women here. We have so much support. We have so many brothers and sisters out there that for me, it's like a celebration now. It wasn't before, but it is now, today.
Just on the topic of supports, I'll just put some up at the bottom of the screen. Just recognizing that everyone is at their own place of finding identity, finding safety and community, finding their way to those good ways and home to those teachings that can help us and guide us. So if anyone is feeling in need of support, please do reach out. Yeah, I was going to ask as well, you've all mentioned tradition in some ways. Are there ways, I mean, it feels silly to ask this, especially of you, Elder Amanda, when you're dressed in very traditional dress and holding your feathers. I was going to ask, how do you bring tradition into your daily life? Clearly, you are literally wearing it, Amanda.
Well, I tell everyone the very first thing I do when I wake up, I lay my tobacco to the east, because granted, there's maybe about 7 billion people on earth. 1 million of those people didn't wake up, an elder would teach me. You woke up to see that sunrise today. You give thanks. You lay that tobacco down. You give thanks. And you live your day like it's your last day. You live it good. You live it happy. You live it clean. You live it helping people. You live it connecting your spirit with the Creator. Everything, as Kimberly said, we come from our land. Everything. We will one again be part of our land again one day. By the time I get to that part, I want to know that I've done something good for our Indigenous youth, our Indigenous people. What gifts has Amanda left? What can I leave for somebody here in a good way? So my first thing is praying. Number one, I pray, I lay my tobacco down, I give thanks for the Creator for this day that I've been blessed with. And then I start my day, shower, and then I smudge. I smudge every day, sometimes more, but it's just being connected. I guess sort of imagine your feet being connected right to Mother Earth. If you have that connection, you're going to feel the power. You're going to feel it. The Creator is going to show you the way if you don't have an answer.
I think that's an interesting question, because I think, some of the things that I would consider to be bringing tradition into my everyday life don't necessarily look like that specifically. So like, I'll make an effort to spend some time outside, just kind of with my eyes closed, to being grateful for the sunshine and for the fresh air and for all of those things. And I feel like that's really an attempt to sort of connect with land and connect with all of our relatives, not just two-leggeds, but like all of our relatives in the natural world, right? I received a teaching in the last little while around braiding my hair. So my new thing is that I have pretty long hair, and I'll braid it, and I'll just kind of go through the ritual of thinking about what that means and why we braid our hair and why that's important. I've recently taken up beading, so I'll sometimes spend times, especially if I'm in kind of if it's like a Zoom meeting and it's a difficult topic, I'll just sit there and do something with my hands that puts, my spirit in a good place, so that I'm able to respond in a good way and able to say what I hope are the right things to be helpful. And then obviously, I will smudge sometimes at home. I just try to live well, to Elder Amanda's point, to live well, to live happy, to live in a way that lifts up people rather than kind of bringing them down. And for me, even though it doesn't look like, traditional activities necessarily, I think those are really traditional beliefs. They're the way that our communities historically stayed cohesive and contributed to the wellness of every person in the community, but also the health of the community itself. So for me, even things like that are sort of bringing tradition into your day. It's also just about living well and doing things in a good way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate that, Karine, and also Elder Amanda, the idea of smudging every day. So although I don't smudge every day, it's becoming more consistent for me. I have medicines. I grow medicine now as well. All the medicines actually, except tobacco. But that's something that slowly I'll continue to get more consistent with. What's nice is that I have access at work. It's amazing to be able to have access to those types of spiritual medicines, literal medicines, but spiritual medicines while at work, because work can be challenging. And also really appreciate connecting outside, just grounding with nature. That's good medicine for me too. Plus, going to ceremony for anyone who's just trying to find that connection and those teachings that you get just from being together in community. So it doesn't matter what kind of ceremony, whether you go and you watch powwows, or you go to sun dances and you support there, or you do a sweat lodge, or you smudge as a ceremony too, or you do the spring and fall equinox and the summer and winter solstices. That connection, there's something so deeply enriching. What feels so good, like your whole being feels so good. So those are some ways in which I try and make sure that the culture stays close. And last year, just a little fun fact, I've always wanted to jingle dress dance. And the 150th anniversary of the signing of the treaty in my nation was during the pandemic. So as we know, there were no powwows. So my cousin made me a most beautiful jingle dress during all that time. It has 66 jingles on it. It's heavy.
Wow.
And although I had to delay, I danced my first powwow jingle dress style this past year. And it was a beautiful event for me, meaningfully, because my kids were there, my mom was there, aunties and uncles and relatives were there, and it just felt like a real wow.
That sounds so beautiful. I was hoping to make it to the Jingle Mingle this last year, but I think I had a caroling conflict.
That's fun too.
Kayla, our director of our unit here, she goes. Okay. So I think we'll wrap up. We're almost at the hour, so we'll give everybody back 4 minutes of their day. But thank you to everyone so very much for coming. Thank you so much to our three speakers, Elder Amanda, Kimberley, Karine. So yeah, we'll end the stream now, but have a wonderful rest of your days and weekends, and we'll see you at our next dialogue. Bye-bye.
Bye.